Charlie Weis says no thanks to the NFL, and Trinidad Chambliss staying at Ole Miss. Probably. We'll explain. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. A couple of things that we'll get to here in this bonus coverage, because here on Monday morning, as we record, there's two significant pieces of news that have come out this morning that will impact sort of directly LSU. Charlie Weis, after Sunday, there were rumors of potential interest in the New York Giants offensive coordinator job. Charlie Weis has, on the record, debunked that, says he's not leaving LSU. I want to get to where those rumors started, why they started, and what that means for LSU. And then also, our buddy Ross Dellinger reporting Trinidad Chambliss has agreed to stay at Ole Miss pending the approval of his waiver. So I want to talk about what happened there in just a bit. Let's start with Weis, though. So Sunday, there was a report from the ESPN New York folks. And effectively that Charlie Weis could be a person of interest in the Giants' search for a new offensive coordinator. And I think this caught a lot of people off guard initially because we just hadn't heard anything about Charlie Weis and any NFL interest. So, and this was the first report came from Jordan Renan, who is the ESPN NFL Nation reporter for the New York Giants. So Jordan Renan put out that first tweet, which had heard an interesting name as a possibility to work with quarterback Jackson Dart on the next Giants staff, Charlie Weis. Connection to Ole Miss, father was an NFL coach, would be an intriguing option. That was the tweet. Well, you have to ask, where did that come from? Well, before we get to that, let's go to the most current news. The most current news is that hat tip Chris Lowe, who Chris Lowe has a great relationship with Lane Kiffin. So I think for LSU fans, we need to get used to hearing a lot of Lane Kiffin-related, LSU-related staff news coming from Chris Lowe because they have a great relationship, and that's where Lane is going to go to report and leak a lot of his information. Well, Charlie Weis Jr. told Chris Lowe Monday on the record, quote, "I'm fired up about finishing the job at Ole Miss and the future at LSU," adding that he has no interest in going to the NFL. He is committed to LSU. So we can end that speculation now. Charlie Weis not going to the NFL. A lot of people have asked about the buyout. I've explained it on a few different platforms. If you haven't heard it yet, Weis has a 3-year, $7.5 million contract at LSU. Should he leave before April 1st of this year, his buyout is 300% of his salary, which is $2.5 million. So the 300% would be $7.5 million. Basically, if Charlie Weis leaves LSU before April 1st, he would owe LSU $7.5 million. Now, the exceptions are for a college job, a head coaching job, or to leave for the NFL. So had he taken a job with the Giants or gone to the NFL, that buyout would be nullified. So he could leave for the NFL and not have any financial penalty. But the real question is, where would something like that stem from? Why would Jordan Renan, a guy who doesn't cover Ole Miss, who doesn't cover LSU, why would a guy who covers the New York Giants be mentioning an LSU assistant because of his ties to Ole Miss? Someone had to plant that for him. I mean, you said it, like, interesting name I'm hearing you in the tweet. Well, again, I know some of this is going to take reworking some of our thought process and actually believing that some of this is possible. But if you go back with me several weeks, I told you, it's been made so clear to me through people around the Ole Miss program that Ole Miss is going to do everything they can to try to embarrass Lane Kiffin. I've told you that from the beginning. From hiring staff members, which you've seen with Austin Thomas and Frank Wilson and Kelvin Bolden and Jai Shuderi going back They're going to target LSU players in the portal. They're going to target Louisiana high school kids. And all of that is going to be perception to try to make Lane Kiffin look bad. I've said it before. It sounds petty. It sounds small. I think it is. I think it's very small-minded. I think that's why Ole Miss has been what they've been for 6 decades. But they're having a great run right now. They're still ticked about Lane Kiffin, and they're not taking it lying down. I think all of this very much was leaked at a time intentionally when you're in quarterback visit week for the transfer portal. I mean, on the day that Brendan Sorsby is visiting LSU is when the report about, or the rumor, I should say, about Charlie Weis and the Giants gets leaked. Why? To try to muddy the waters as LSU and Lane Kiffin are trying to attract a quarterback via the transfer portal. And if you don't think if you think that I'm making this up, if you think this is plucked from the air and this is I'm tinfoil hat guy, you can believe what you want. But suffice to say, ever since we've started this with Kiffin and LSU and the interest there at the beginning of November, I've been writing an awful lot on all this stuff. And I'm not wrong here. And I also would not be surprised if you think of the connection from Ole Miss to the New York Giants. It's one of the greatest quarterbacks in Ole Miss history and one of the greatest quarterbacks in Giants history who might have had the connections to drop a line to some of the New York media to get that story out there. Yes, I'm talking about Eli Manning. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's where this sort of was rooted. If Manning said, hey, you know who could be a great fit here is Charlie Weis. Bright young guy, worked with Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. Could be the no buyout at LSU for an NFL gig. Could make a lot of sense to come on staff to work with your young quarterback. Wouldn't surprise me at all if we learned that's where that leaked, if we ever learn that. But go back again to what we talked about. This is perception, okay? When Austin Thomas takes the job at Ole Miss, it's, we got Austin Thomas. Did you? Because Lane Kiffin brought his GM. Austin was, and I think the world of Austin Thomas. But Austin Thomas didn't leave LSU for Ole Miss. He was not retained by Lane Kiffin. You talk about Frank Wilson going to Ole Miss. Ole Miss didn't steal Frank Wilson. Lane Kiffin wanted to bring Kevin Smith with him. Now, we all have opinions on that. I shared mine. I would have loved to have retained Frank Wilson. Lane Kiffin wanted to bring his guy. Okay, it's his staff. It's his prerogative. He can hire who he wants. So Frank Wilson was looking for a job, and Ole Miss hired him. Smart move, by the way, by Pete Golding to hire him. Say like Kelvin Bold and Jai Shuderi. Okay, going back, would they have been retained? I don't know. So, but so much of that is just how you phrase it publicly. And Ole Miss is doing everything they can to try to poke and prod Lane Kiffin publicly because he's a guy who sometimes is clearly susceptible to poking and prodding, as we saw with the comment from the reporter, after the Egg Bowl about the lyric about calling him a hoe. So those things are very clearly, to me, as I understand, intended to try to embarrass and poke and prod Lane Kiffin to try to get him to react. So the great news for LSU, if we don't get sideways on all this, the great news for LSU is that Charlie Weis has said on the record he's put an end to this. And I think that was very intentional also because on today, as we record this Monday morning, LSU is hosting Sam Leavitt today, Monday, less than 24 hours after Brendan Sorsby committed to Texas Tech. So you couldn't have this air of uncertainty around the offensive coordinator while you're hosting Sam Leavitt, who's the other top target at quarterback in the transfer portal. So Charlie Weis denies NFL interest. LSU moving on to Sam Leavitt is now their primary target in the portal at quarterback. And the other guy they were targeting, as we've talked about often, was Trinidad Chambliss. Now, I want to talk about this because Chambliss has agreed to return to Ole Miss. I want to tell you how all this came about. And by the way, I don't think that's the last potential LSU target that's going to be reaffirming to Ole Miss today. I'll explain and tell you what I know next. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel is making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Opening the FanDuel app during Happy Hour always brings something new, boosts and bonuses and surprises. It's an easy way to check the weekly specials before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour. That's every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We're also brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like college football season, tailgates, packed stadiums, and being right there in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating. Long queues, logins, prices jumping at checkout. And that's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. The app is incredibly easy to use. You go from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. I love being able to see the view from my seat. The zone deals stand out. You pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more. So seeing college football tickets start as low as $25 made it easy to plan a game day trip. But now that the college football playoff is here, if you want to be there in that number, you can do it, and Game Time can help. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. The other big news that came Monday morning came courtesy of Ross Dellinger over at Yahoo, and that is that Trinidad Chambliss and Ole Miss have agreed to a deal that will keep Chambliss at Ole Miss for the 2026 season contingent on his eligibility waiver request granted. Dellinger notes that school officials are hoping this week for resolution to the waiver, seeking a 6th year. He writes, his dad told us he's, quote, confident. Again, that's the report from Ross Dellinger. So a few things. If you're an everydayer, shout out and thank you. Remember, we've talked about this. LSU pivoted from Trinidad Chambliss because of the waiver uncertainty. Initially, when Lane Kiffin came, there was a handful of players, of Ole Miss players, that would have been targets. And Ole Miss winning has complicated that. There's no denying that at this point. I don't think many people thought that they would be playing past January 1st, but thinking that when Ole Miss lost, the portal would open the next day, and a handful of these players would be in the transfer portal. I mean, I'll remind you of this. This was Trinidad Chambliss himself. You don't even need to take my word for it. Chambliss, before the first round playoff game against Tulane, Chambliss was asked if he gets his waiver, would he be back at Ole Miss or would he consider other options? Again, this is Trinidad Chambliss saying this before the playoff game against Tulane.
I would have to consider what the best situation is for me, what I feel most comfortable with, who I trust the most, and just get a feel for every possibility really. So there's a lot that goes into that.
If he was returning to Ole Miss and bullish, he'd be saying, I'm not leaving Ole Miss. I love being here. I want to be here. But he's telling you that was before the Tulane game that he was going to be open to whatever possibility. And that possibility was very likely going to be following Lane Kiffin, Charlie Weis to LSU at a number just under $4 million, as we reported. Well, also, we're very adamant over the weekend that LSU clearly moved on as the uncertainty around Chambliss's waiver grew. LSU realized they couldn't wait. They couldn't wait for a what if. What if Chambliss's waiver isn't granted? Well, if Chambliss's waiver isn't granted and you waited for the NCAA to give you a ruling and you miss out on the top quarterback prospects in the portal, well, then you make it through the first wave of portal. All the top quarterbacks have signed elsewhere. You don't get Chambliss. Then what do? You're really in trouble. So that's when LSU had to make the decision really to pivot at the start of the portal cycle away from Chambliss. It's why they went all in on Sorsby, and now they're on Leavitt. They had Sorsby on campus. Sorsby picked Texas Tech. Now it's Leavitt. As we record this Monday morning, Sam Levitt, the Arizona State transfer, is visiting LSU today, Monday, and LSU is going to go all in to try to get Sam Levitt committed and signed. And I think they have a fantastic opportunity to do it. The caveat, again, I'll remind you of is, and I'm not done talking about Ole Miss, but the caveat I'll remind you is that Levitt, with the Lisfranc injury, is very likely going to miss spring practice. And LSU's aware of that, which means you wouldn't have on-field time, new offense, new scheme, new coaches, new terminology, new teammates. Not having your starting quarterback for spring would be detrimental. It would be a lot of VR glasses and all that sort of stuff to get Levitt to sort of come along as quickly as possible. But like we talked about in a previous episode, remember Joe Burrow, when he came to LSU post-spring in 2018, showed up in June. It was a process for LSU's offense to really get going. He went the entire month of October in 2018, Joe Burrow did, without throwing a touchdown pass. It wasn't until November that you started to see him sort of hit that kick into the end of the season, then into 2019, which was magical. But for LSU, you don't really have that grace period. I mean, you open up in Tiger Stadium against Clemson on Labor Day weekend, so you got to be ready to go. But anyway, that's why Chambliss has re-upped with Ole Miss. I don't know it's necessarily that he was just aching to stay at Ole Miss. I think certainly there's a lot of longing and feeling there, considering the playoff run they're on. I mean, he's getting into the sort of stratosphere where, you win another game, they're putting your name on the stadium type deal, you retiring your number type stuff is what I mean. So, but I just think Chambliss didn't have other options, right, at this point. So staying at Ole Miss is probably his best and really his only option at this point. So LSU is moving on to, and had moved on to, Sam Levitt. So I don't think the Chambliss news is any great surprise. And if LSU lands Sam Levitt, then LSU's in a really good spot, and then Ole Miss will have a what if Chambliss we'll have a backup plan if Chambliss gets his waiver. The other thing, though, is that I don't think the Chambliss news is the only news we're getting today from Ole Miss. I mentioned in a previous episode that when Kevin Smith went back to Oxford on Sunday, I felt that was less about the college football playoff and more about Kewan Lacy. And I think that's probably the next shoe to drop, is that we'll probably end up hearing that Kewan Lacy, a decision there, and it feels like the momentum has shifted toward Lacy staying at Ole Miss for another year. And when that happens, we'll react to it. Listen, I think two things can be true at the same time. One is you would love to have Kewan Lacy on your team. He's an All-American running back this year, over 1,300 yards, 20 touchdowns. He's outstanding. In this offense, this conference, with these coaches, this term, yes, you would absolutely love to have Kewan Lacy. That is true. I'm not going to downplay Lacy. The other part of it is, I've told you this on the record, I have no problem saying this number. Ole Miss had an offer on the table for Kewan Lacy for $1.8 million, meaning LSU was going to have to go north of that to get him, which they were willing to do. And since Ole Miss beat Georgia, they've advanced. There's this emotion there. And I also think there's a lot of motivation from Ole Miss to retain players, to keep them away from LSU, chief among them Chambliss and Lacy. And so if they've bumped their offer for Lacy to keep him and he stays, I actually think it's prudent to not spend $2 million on a running back, especially when you've got Harlem Berry returning. And you brought in Carter Vargas via the portal from UC Davis on a visit. He may end up committing this week. We'll see how that goes. And I mentioned to you a day ago, JT Lindsay. They've extended him the offer to return. That was a top 150 overall running back in the country. So all that to say, do you want Kewan Lacy? Yes, of course you do. But do you want him at north of $2 million when you have an entire roster build? The same question and conversation we're having about Brendan Sorsby. Would you have wanted Sorsby? Absolutely. But if Texas Tech, and there are reports out there now, I told you on the episode with Sorsby committing that the number got above $5 million, and there's some reports 5.5, 6, maybe. If LSU was offering 3.85 for Trinidad Chambliss, and it was going to take mid fives to get, or higher, to get Brendan Sorsby, at some point you just have to be prudent and say that doesn't make sense. I'd rather take that money, the difference, and go invest it in offensive line and receivers, which Lord knows LSU needs plenty of both at this point. So I'm just going to tell you candidly, you're probably not going to get a lot of overreaction from me on any of these personnel decisions, commits, guys going else, like transfers. What I want to see is, what does the roster look like at the end of the portal cycle? Because while yes, it's disappointing not to get Sorsby, can you feel really good about walking away with Sam Levitt? Sure. If Kewan Lacy ends up staying at Ole Miss, like it sounds like it will, but you've retained Harlem Berry, and maybe that you get another top running back in the portal, like, do you feel good about your running back room? Sure. Is it disappointing seeing talented young receivers like Kyle Parker and Teron Francis enter the transfer portal? Sure it is. But if you go sign a half dozen receivers out of the transfer portal that all have college skins on the wall, do you feel good about your receiver room? Absolutely. So again, I'm not going to do the emotional ebb and flow roller coaster with every commitment, leave, who you get. I'm going to take the 10,000-foot view and look at what it looks like at the end of the portal window, and make an assessment of the roster from there for Lane Kiffin's year one. But what we know is it won't be Trinidad Chambliss, and here's hoping it's Sam Levitt, and whoever it is, the guy that'll be on the headset calling plays is Charlie Weis, as he has rebuffed interest or rumored interest from the NFL and the New York Giants, solidifying his year in Baton Rouge and certainly providing some stability as the Tigers go try to pursue a quarterback in this portal cycle. And as it develops, we'll certainly continue to keep you up to date all the way through. So make sure, if you're on podcast, you've not done so yet, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, thank you so much for being there as well. Please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU. It's your team every day.